Thank you for joining, everybody. We obviously often get started informally before I sort of kick things off. My name is Michael Goldberg, and I'm our executive director for the Veal Institute for Entrepreneurship here at Case Western Reserve. I'm also a professor at the Weatherhead School of Management, and it is great to welcome my friend and fellow Ohioan, Kent Johnson, the CEO of Highlights, to today's entrepreneurship speaker series. Like all of our sessions, we have our wonderful Case Western Reserve University students moderating, and we have Regina, who's an undergraduate international affairs student, will be moderating. Probably, Kent's wife and I are college friends and classmates, and both studied politics and international affairs back undergrad. So Regina can ping you on your, as we span the globe of topics today. It's of interest to both myself and Kent's wife, Jillian. For those that are on Zoom or joining on LinkedIn Live, we would like to have these super interactive. So just let Regina know, either in Zoom, if you have a question, you can raise your hand on Zoom, or if you're on LinkedIn Live, just put a question in the comments and we'll make sure we feed it to Regina. So with that, Regina, over to you, and thank you so much, Kent, for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all, and even more so to introduce our guest speaker. Our amazing guest received his bachelor's degree from Amherst College and his PhD in physics from Harvard University. He began his career in scientific research and development, as well as manufacturing and operations, before joining the family business, Highlights for Children. He is only the third CEO of the company since his great-grandparents founded it in 1946. Highlights for Children publishes the popular kids magazine, Highlights, which I'm sure many of you know by the big red logo at the top, which strives to foster education through children's publishing. There you go. Alongside being CEO of Highlights, he serves on the board of trustees for several companies, including Shirts Communications and Nationwide Children's Hospital. Please join me in welcoming Kent Johnson.
Thank you, Regina. Oh, thank you. It's a great introduction. I'm really excited to be here today. I talk about one of my favorite subjects, Highlights for Children. I guess, you saw the big red rhomboid. When we go out in the world, most people know us for the magazine. But where I want to start is to tell you we're actually not a magazine company. So I want to tell you a little bit about who we are, give you a little bit of a background, just to plant some seeds for things we could discuss or different avenues we could go down. So we really think of ourselves as a company that was created to serve children. So I describe ours as a mission-driven for-profit entity. So we actually are a for-profit company, but our whole existence is about serving children. So we're built on a set of beliefs and a vision for what we want the world to be. So when we talk internally, we say, our vision for the world, if we're successful at our business, is to make a more optimistic and empathetic world for children. So we're trying to we try to create experiences that foster delight and joyful learning that contribute to human development. We talk about the importance and our mission being to help all children become their best selves. And so for us, we define best selves, just to give you an idea of the breadth, as confident, caring, creative, and curious. So we think of ourselves as broadly educational on all of those kind of whole child, the social, emotional, the physical, the intellectual, the moral and spiritual, like all of the sort of developmental aspects that round out the kind of people we all want to become, the kind of what we believe is a universal aspiration that parents have to raise good kids, kids who will contribute in a positive way. So to the world. So we have a few foundational beliefs. Our most important belief that we base everything on is the idea that children are the world's most important people. We also have the belief that childhood is an exceedingly short, sweet season. And so we take very seriously, and we think adults should take very seriously what they invest and the thought they put into content and experiences for children, because we just have this short window when we're children, and it's so important what happens in the early years. We also believe that children have the potential to change their world, and they grow up to be adults who can change the world if they believe a few important things. And I won't go through all of them, but if they believe that all people are deserving of dignity and respect, if they understand that kindness is never wasted, that learning is a lifelong kind of aspiration, a lifelong process. If they really believe that all of us have a role in making the world more fair and just, and it's important to stand up for what's right. Like those types of things are the beliefs we try to build into our content to help scaffold the development of children. So I've talked about beliefs. I want to quickly take through a little bit more what the company is. I said we weren't a magazine company. We, of course, still are a magazine company. We had a very young potential subscriber on the call. We actually have a magazine for babies. If you want to talk about innovation, I could tell the story of developing a magazine for children who don't yet read that they can take in the bathtub and safely chew on. Is a great story of innovation. It has nothing to do with technology. But our company is broadly education. We think of ourselves as educational, creating educational experiences. So you have the Highlights brand, where we're really trying to build a lot of different experiences from the brand, emanating from the beliefs and the sort of brand pillar of the magazines. But we do a lot of other things in terms of subscription clubs, digital experiences. We're growing very rapidly at retail. With products. We're doing a lot of products that are more about supporting learning at home, sort of school readiness, school success. We have a whole nother division of our company, just to give you a quick sense, that serves, the idea was a family business diversifying, getting into curriculum and supporting teachers. So we do things that help teachers in their professional development get better at their craft. And we also do a lot of curriculum resources that go into elementary schools to scaffold foundational literacy and reading and vocabulary, that type of thing. Another area that's important to us is our international business, which is actually half digital. We're trying to play a role, as big a role as we can, in developing a love of reading for kids learning English all around the world, places like China, Korea, Asia, South America, Middle East, sort of all of these regions where there are a lot of kids with a thirst to develop English language learning skills. We're about 500 employees. We're corporately based here in Columbus, Ohio. We've got people all across the country, a product development group in Northeast Pennsylvania, people in New England. So let me pause let me just switch one other piece to know. We are a family business. So next year we celebrate, next month in June, we will celebrate the 75th anniversary of our existence as a company. So kind of a fun birthday celebration. But we really believe strongly. We do a lot on the governance side of the family business with our board. We try to bring all the best practices we can to how do you create a sustainable, professionally run company. So there's a whole series of things. My great-grandparents did found the company, which is why whenever I get introduced and people say, what in the world is a person with a PhD in physics doing at a children's magazine? There is that DNA connection. My 14-year-old likes to remind me that I only get my job because of nepotism. We'll at least put it out there. And for any of you who know 14-year-olds, you know how fun that can be. But I did start out, and even though I was sort of brought up to be very supportive of the company and saw roles to contribute that wouldn't be an employee, I did everything I could to not join the family business, and I failed at it, including teaching high school, spending 6 years in a wonderful basement in Massachusetts, earning a PhD in physics, and then had a great run that I just loved in biotech, where I learned a lot about business and kind of moved to the business side before joining Highlights back in 2004. If people are interested in talking about succession, our company leadership, we've had long-serving leaders, but we've had tragedies where we lost leadership suddenly. I was thrust into the role after only 7 months in the industry when my predecessor passed away. So we've had a lot of experiences of just having to sort of take things on, and how to succession of leadership, how does that all work? The last piece I would say is, we're just a little bit about the future. One of the things that drew me into the company are the kind of things I continue to work on. And that's, if you're a company that's in publishing, you're in competitive markets, the world is changing faster and faster. So things like, what is technology doing to consumer behaviors, to marketing practices? What's changing about the competitive landscape of what children do and don't do in their lives? How do you make an impact and remain relevant in a world that's moving at an incredible pace? All of those kind of disruptive factors that we face that require entrepreneurs to be creative and move quickly, those were the kind of things that convinced me that Highlights for Children, a magazine I might have known as a child, was a business more interesting than just a kind of a calm magazine. So there's a lot going on. I think we're focused on how do we use insight into consumers, whether they're teachers or consumers. How do we base everything we do on the needs that consumers have and really understanding what they want, and then building from the strengths of our beliefs, our brand, and try to find ways to be more relevant and make a larger positive impact on the world over time through the things that we do as a company. So I'm going to take a breath. I wanted to go quickly to just plant different seeds, but let me pause and let's make this a conversation.
Yes, thank you for being here, Kent, and for that amazing introduction to Highlights. I have a few questions to get us started, but everyone, please feel free to use the raise hand function or type any questions in the chat, and I will be more than happy to help moderate those. So Kent, can you tell us a little bit about how Highlights, being a family business, affects how you run the company compared to if you were running a publicly owned company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we have in our family ownership, we have, mission statements where imagine a group really working on how do we make sure we can articulate together our values and our beliefs. And one of the things that the family believes is that by staying privately held and family held, it allows us to maintain a commitment to the mission and belief of the company. So I think, you've seen, we've all seen sort of an evolution about how companies, whether it's, different organizations have come out and said, we have to actually pay attention to all of our stakeholders. I think as opposed to the sort of more traditional model of capitalism where the company is all about, well, how do we serve and create value for the shareholders? So fundamentally, we think being a family business allows us to put the right balance on what are our stakeholders? Who are we trying to serve? And our number one stakeholder is actually our customers. So we exist for them. And actually, I think that is sort of a recipe for sustainability, because if you serve your customers properly, you end up, I think, over time, building a trust, building a brand, and building a sustainable business. But we also think very deeply about our employees are a critical stakeholder. If we're not creating a great environment for employees to grow and thrive, we're not going to be a sustainable company. Our vendors and partners, there's so many things we do we couldn't do without others. So we want to think about how do we treat our partners, select them carefully, treat them well, treat them carefully. And of course, our shareholders are a constituent. But being a family business, I think it feels like the world's moving towards the idea of conscious capitalism and broad stakeholders. But for us, we felt by staying private, we can make short-term sacrifices financially when it's in the long-term interest of our customers and all our stakeholders. So we think it's an essential piece of trying to run the company the way we think it should be run.
Thank you. And you mentioned, doing other things before joining Highlights, and you also said trying to avoid joining the company for as long as possible. But did you always get the sense that you were going to end up joining the company? What really persuaded you to join?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, I wasn't playing coy. I mean, I think I was lucky. I think I've had experiences in my life that I've loved. I loved physics. I mean, it was my passion. And, I always thought there were ways to support the company, but I never thought I'd work here. I'm not even sure I'm actually a believer in capitalism. I didn't necessarily want to be in a business. So it was definitely a journey. And what I learned in biotech, as I moved from lab science and the bench to more business, manufacturing, sales, service, that type of thing, is that business is really interesting. It's really fun. It's really complex. And ultimately, I've become a completely converted believer that businesses have a huge positive impact on people's lives. And so I'm kind of, if anything, I might describe, I'm sort of an impact junkie. I want to know what are the things we can do to affect others in a positive way, that someday when we're on that final day of our lives, we can reflect back and say, how do I feel about what I was involved in? So that brought me to business because of the potential to impact. And then just to round it out, I was in a rotating position on our board of directors in 2002 timeframe. And I was learning about the company, and I had a couple realizations. One, the business was much more interesting and complex than I realized. two, I saw this executive team. I saw really competent people at the company. And I think you should always try to find ways to work with great people who your values align with. But I also we were waiting the arrival of my first son. And so there's something about that process where you really think, I'm going to be a parent. What are my values? What do I want to do with my life? Anticipating sleep deprived days and the future. All that was on my mind as I sort of saw this opportunity to come in the company and try to play a role in what our company tries to do in the world. So that was the context and the evolution. It was never really planned.
Thank you. And you mentioned, besides learning, the power of business when you joined Highlights, what was the biggest learning curve going from working in research and development to becoming CEO?
Yeah, I mean, it's a gigantic learning curve. And I remember because I came into the company in the summer of 2004, and my predecessor passed away in January 2005. So he wasn't feeling very well. So we had started to accelerate a succession plan, which we thought would be like a 5-year plan, and ended up being 6-7 months. And I remember pretty vividly going to when my board appointed me CEO, and we had our first meeting. I was 36, and they said, look, first of all, calm down, like relax. Second of all, you have 2 jobs. One job is you need to learn to be a CEO. And the second job is you've actually got to learn all these industries we're in. You're new to these industries. There's a lot of content knowledge. And it's interesting, as I reflect back now, sort of 16, 17 years later, I actually sort of think those are my 2 jobs today, because the world's changing so fast. I think it's a really dangerous thing in business or in leadership to ever get to the point where you feel like you're confident that you fully understand your markets and your business. You've got to keep that new eye, that curiosity, because things are changing very quickly. But it was a huge learning curve. And I'd say the number one thing is we had a very strong team at the point when I took over. So you have to, when you're going up a learning curve, you have to rely on the good people around you, and you have to work really hard. But I think I'm still learning. And sometimes I think I annoy people by, articulating that I don't feel like I really know how to do my job well. It's really important to always be learning. So yeah, there's a ton to learn, and it's almost always about people and organization. Like it's about the human aspects are where I put my most, it's the most important to be moving up the learning curves about the human pieces of the business. I don't know if that answered your question, Regina, but that's a stab at it.
Yeah, Albert actually had a similar question in the chat, which I completely missed. Albert, if you would like to unmute and ask a follow-up question, or if that answered your question.
No, I think that it was pretty close to the question I was going to ask, having similar experiences.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question in the chat from Brittany. Brittany, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and asking that question, that would be great.
Yeah, and Ken, thank you. This has been really great. I'm a former MBA student, and this is my first time kind of re-engaging with CASE, and just really excited to see such a great company sharing some wisdom with students. So thank you for that. I did join a couple of minutes late, but I heard you mention right as I was dialing in, the importance of really understanding your customers. I think you even used the word insights. So can you share with us some of the things that you do to stay connected with your customers to make sure that you're really, delivering on things that matter to them?
Yeah, and I think there are a couple different avenues, because it's a great question, and I think we're learning and evolving. So I don't want to ever convey that we're perfect at it. But so we're first let me talk about the product. And we have this really fun book coming out in August called Dear Highlights: What Adults Can Learn from 75 Years of Letters and Conversations with Kids. So the one thing I'd say is we have this whole group of editors and product developers who are immersed in the lives of children. We've answered every letter kids have sent us. We listen carefully to kids. We do prototyping and interacting so that we keep a pulse of like, what are kids' lives like? So there's a whole piece around the product side of really staying close to what children are experiencing. on the kind of adult and consumer side, I think there's two or three pieces. There's the data-driven piece. So we are data-based marketers. So we do a lot of tracking of what are the trends of how people are buying from us. What are they buying from us? We do a lot of, we're a small company, so we do a lot of looking at syndicated research, like what's out there that the research companies who understand how moms and families are buying, like we consume a lot of that. But we also do focus groups. We put in market sort of brand tracker studies where we're asking consumers, not just our customers, but cross sections of millennial parents and grandparents, like asking them about our brand and what types of things that we think our products would be good. What are they open to receiving for us? So we have a consumer insights group combined with a data analytics group that sort of spends all their time trying to understand what's out there, and then also ask and answer sort of curiosity-based targeted questions. So it's really important, and I think we're trying to get better at it every year.
That's absolutely excellent. I actually used to be an insights manager in my last role, so that's near and dear to my heart. Do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up question? And I hope it's not too insensitive to ask this question,
No,
but
go ahead.
How does Highlights deal with, there's so many things going on in the world that are very, very challenging topics, and parents. I am a parent. I have an 8-year-old. We've had Highlights since she was a baby. How do you actually touch on those kinds of topics? Do you try to stay away from them? What kind of position do you have, and how do you make those decisions?
It's interesting because there's, you could sort of ask that question from two perspectives, like because our world has become complex, and CEOs and companies, need to live their values, need to kind of walk their talk, and we know that landscape's changed. So there's like, how does the company express? What do we talk to? How do we deal with or address some of those issues with adults, parents, customers? And then there's the other side, which is the kid side, like what appears in print, how are we addressing issues? So maybe I'll talk on the kid side just briefly. I mean, we are sort of huge believers that we want to help parents and help kids look at it through kids' eyes. So there's always a question of, we're putting the kid first, what's developmentally appropriate, how do we scaffold issues? And some of the things that are happening in the adult world that involve a lot of tension and conflict, they're not in the terms that kids deal with. So like, for instance, whether it's about diversity or what types of kids are pictured in the magazine, our mantra is we want kids to both have windows and mirrors. We want them to see themselves and their environment and their reality brought to life so they can identify. But we also think content for kids can be a window into what other people's lives are, which is critical to build empathy and help develop children who are going to be embrace the sort of inherent diversity in an inclusive way in our country. So we really look at that and think of our role as long-term scaffolding that kind of development. But we certainly, had to face a decision with coronavirus. As of course, we're all aware, masks are not a topic that's lacking in controversy. So, when we put masks on kids in the magazine, we generated some feedback, and we ended up, having our editor-in-chief created a blog to describe the why and how we were thinking about that through the kids' eyes. And not everybody was happy. We got cancellations, we got complaints. So we do things in the magazine that make people mad and make people cancel. And we have to own that and own what we believe and be confident in it. I think the other piece, we have to figure out, and we're working on like a category of activities that are impact partnerships. How do we work with nonprofits to sort of partner in ways that impact the world? And in a few cases, we felt we needed to speak out. So if you Google and look up Highlights for Children and family separation, we did make a statement about that a couple of years ago that went a little viral, and we thought we were just sort of saying something that was obvious, but we did certainly step into a pretty significant political controversy with that. And we've learned a lot about, actually I have a TED Talk out there about what we learned and what that experience was like, if you want to look into it. But it's really tough. I guess to close, because I went on a little long here, we always try to look through the eyes of the kid. Like we don't want to get into a debate for the sake of being in a debate. We think children's voices need to be heard. And if our voice can help, lift up the interests of children in whatever way, that's what our interest is in, because children don't get to vote. We think they're the world's most important people. they don't get to a vote. Like, we need to speak up for kids.
That was really powerful. Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. That's a great question.
It seems like we have another question from Kara in the chat. Kara, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and asking Kent that question, that would be great.
I'm so glad you brought up hello. We are readers of highlights and hello in this household. Again, I have a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and we have been out of school for most of the year, and we've been lucky to get print editions. But I know that a place that a lot of kids access highlights are libraries or even in schools. How has the pandemic kind of shaped the way that you distribute material, if it has at all?
Yeah.
And also, do you have, like, again, we're really familiar with the print, with what my kids chew on and read and tear apart and love. But do you have e-magazine formats or online resources, and have those again shifted or changed at all during the last year?
It's interesting. Our biggest digital stuff is really outside the US. It's about access to libraries to practice reading and develop your love of reading. Everyone asks, it is a common question, like, how has highlights become digital in the US? And we certainly saw, like, during the pandemic, a spike in our, website, in our digital apps, that type of thing. But I should say this, we are unabashed, like, unapologetic advocates for print, particularly for your age group. I mean, I don't care if we're adults and we never pick up a newspaper. I think that's sad personally, but it's fine. But for kids kind of 0 to 12, the tactile technology of print is really awesome. Like, there's not something broken about print. So, one of the things we did see as well in the pandemic, I think that, and maybe not with the 1-year-old, but as parents, and we really on our consumer business side tried to embrace our response to the pandemic by the empathy we had for our previous parent selves. And we have so many parents who were dealing with homeschooling, digital, like all the remote things. And we just sort of said, what could we do to support those parents? So we tried to provide, digital activities that weren't all to be digitally done, but would provide it free and digital, but maybe give inspiration for other things that could happen that were interactive. I think what we definitely saw is, and if anybody has a child who was doing remote learning from kindergarten to 6th grade, like, everyone got plenty of screen time. Like, we actually believe that parents probably had an experience where they said, hey, enough's enough. I mean, I want quality screen time. I want that to be as good as it can be. But we did see an increase for some of our print products because it would give an alternative to staring more at that iPad or that Chromebook or whatever the technology was. So we're huge believers in print, but I guess the last thing I'd say is I try to push people, and I'm a technologist, right? I'm a physicist. I love technology, but I try to say we don't care about the bells and whistles of technology. We care about that being sitting on your lap. Is the technology, the print, how it works together, is it creating an experience for a human, a child, that scaffolds their child development in a productive way? So if we answer that question right, then the technology can be useful. So I don't know, that's sort of a little bit all over the place, but just to give you a sense, I love technology, but we're a company about kids. So when technology helps, we're all in. When print helps, we're all in.
Thank you so much.
Kent, as a current undergraduate student, and I'm sure our audience is a mix of professors, staff, can you tell us what we can do to help highlights foster their mission of fostering education through children's publishing?
Yeah, I mean, one, talk about it. Like, I think, I do think that I see this incredible trend in society that people care about what companies stand for, about what they're trying to do. So I would encourage anyone who's young, actually, forget that disclaimer, anyone, find a place to work and support that aligns with your values. Like, life is too short to do something that doesn't fit with what you want the world to be like. So, more specifically for us, I mean, tell people about highlights, or look at our website, see what jobs we have. I mean, I do think that people who are coming out right now out of undergrad or grad, this is a pretty good time in the economy. Like, we need to hire people. So look at our website and see if there are any jobs we have that look interesting, and contact us. I don't know, that's maybe too specific. I don't know if anyone said I was allowed to be recruiting, but definitely, more importantly, find companies and jobs, find a path through life that aligns with what the world you want to exist. Like that advice has worked well for me, and I think that advice always works.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And it seems like Michael has a question in the chat. If you want to go ahead and ask Kent yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I understand Ken is a big advocate for the print. Well, I think kids also love print as well, but the challenge facing the publishing business right now is print has such a huge cost and digital is like much cheaper. So, you are also an entrepreneur, you need to think about cost, you need to make your business profitable. And how would you balance these two?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a wonderful point, and I also think that it's not just cost. There's also a question of access and equity. And so I think some of the ways we look at the U.S., as a society, look at the U.S. educational system is how do we play off the quality of experience, the cost, using technology. And I think unfortunately the pandemic exposed a very broad set of inequities in our society in terms of access to technology, broadband connectivity. So I think there's another layer around technology. But for me, one of the most exciting things about technology is that a small company in Central Ohio can be creating this incredible content. We're putting so much effort in this content. And then in Northeast Pennsylvania, and just to give you a sense, each month we then record all of that in audio in English. And the same time it gets sent to US mailboxes, we ship in China the same magazine with a talking pen that can point at anything on any page and read it to that kid, from a voice in Northeast Pennsylvania to kids all across China. So I think it's the technology, that's print and technology, but that's something that wouldn't be possible without technology. But it also says technology allows us to reach more kids. And it's partly because of the cost, because some of the distribution issues, you'd never be able to reach kids. So I do think we're believers in both. I tend to think of the profit question of whether it's technology or whether it's print or whether it's the two together. You have to understand the experience you're creating for the kid, and there has to be enough value in that experience that either a school or the parent or a third party is willing to pay enough money so that you can make money to keep investing in that type of thing. So sometimes here's what's been a challenge for publishers. We've thought that technology can make it so low cost that sometimes we don't have a model to charge people. Like you saw this in the newspaper industry. No paywalls, it's all free. We're going to make it up on advertising. What happened to the digital world of newspapers? All the advertising dollars went to Facebook and Google, and the journalism industry was in deep trouble. So I think it's about creating value and having the right mix of standalone technology, technology in print, or technology in physical integrated, and physical, and trying to build business models when everything's really competitive. Which maybe underneath you can hear me say, just because it's digital doesn't necessarily mean we're making more money from it. As sad as that is, like we've probably had more flops of spending on digital than we have had flops of spending on print. It's just unfortunately the truth of it all. So I hope that answered the question satisfactorily.
Regina, can I get in for a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll ask a quick follow-up, Kent, on as fellow parents of teenagers. I mean, I see how my own kids, whether it's Instagram or TikTok and even Snapchat, I mean, these emerging platforms that luckily didn't exist when you and I were in college, because we would have been wasting God knows how much time. How do you think about embracing these emerging platforms, and even sort of given some of the challenges that even Brittany alluded to, because parents aren't super excited about the amount of time that our kids are spending on these platforms. I'm sort of curious, how do you think about these platform extension opportunities for highlights.
Yeah, it is interesting. So a lot of those platforms, I mean, it's fascinating how fast they change and how much impact they're having on our kids and on our society. I mean, we tend to be an age 0 to 12. So, it's really only our older range that are engaged. I mean, I think at their best, those platforms, I mean, one of the things we believe is that kids should create content. Like in the old days, we'd encourage them to draw pictures and send them in. So at their best, some of these platforms are about creating and sharing, and there can be incredible creativity, connection. Like, so at their good, when you look at a good light, there's some really neat things about those platforms. I think for kids and child development and the kind of human development, there's also some downsides. I mean, whether it's the short attention span, the sort of I think pretty well documented aspect that some of these platforms are not very good for children's mental and emotional health. There's a comparison and always on, and there's sort of some psychological elements that aren't healthy for any of us, but probably also not for children. So and there's also the data issue. So how much of this, how much tracking, how much exposure do kids have? I do think I think we focus on how do you try to build the right values and respect and kind of human aspects that would lead a child as they grow up to be on those platforms, to have the right foundational kind of outlook for their own behaviors. But I know on top of that, it's a challenge for schools when these platforms are changing so quickly. Like, what's the education? What are the guidelines, the policies? How can we empower kids who are going to use these whether we like them or not? So we have to empower kids to kind of use them for good, understand the boundaries, understand how to be safe and protect themselves and each other, both from harm, but also psychologically. So there's a lot of stuff that happens on these platforms that just as a parent, it's very disturbing. And I think it's very challenging because you mentioned it's very challenging for us as parents. They're changing so quickly and we didn't grow up with them. So it's we do try to talk to parents about, trust your instincts, be calm, talk to your child about these things, listen to your child. But these are really complex issues that I'm not the expert on. And I sometimes like to think of 6 and under because it's much simpler before it's much, and having 2 teenagers in the house, it's complex. It's really complex. So I don't have any easy solutions, Mike.
Great, thanks. Regina.
Thank you, Kent. Can you tell us, what does the future hold for highlights?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm really excited and bullish about the future, and it comes from what we talked about earlier. It comes from a customer obsession, and it also comes from when I think of on the one hand, we've been around 75 years, and like we get to celebrate that, talk about the history, and you could imagine that's like, oh, let's feel good about that. Let's I actually feel like it creates 2 things for us. One, just incredible gratitude, all the people and all the work people did to get us here that lets us be the kind of company we are now. But for me, I also take a huge set of pressures and responsibilities. Like, if all that work was done and we have a brand that many consumers consider relevant to their lives, it kind of creates an obligation and a pressure for us to do more. So the mission statement from our family talks about, we got to leave a company that has a greater impact on more people than the one we inherited. So there is an urgency about increasing our brand relevance, increasing the impact on people, on children, on families, and our focus is on the experiences we create for kids. So we're really excited about bringing highlights to life off the page. So whether that's in the cool stuff, we've got some really neat programs rolling out on Audible, like audio programs. We're certainly very interested in transmedia, television, that type of thing. But we're also interested in educational toys, in games and puzzles and things that can bring our brand values to life off the page. And I think in the school side, we're also really excited. I think the disruption of this past year is going to cause educators across the country to think, how can we sort of make up for what was lost? What are the things we can do that can bring more social emotional learning into the classroom? And how do we double down on the kind of foundational skills of literacy? Like, to Mike's point, when you're going to go into all these platforms where we're communicating all the time, it makes it even more important to build great foundational skills in literacy and solid social emotional base, because our world is so complex and fast moving. So we're really excited. We've got a lot to do. We're a private company. We've got a, not a huge team. We're only about 500 people, but we're really excited about the different things that are going on.
Thank you so much for your time today, Kent. Thank you to the audience for such an amazing discussion. And I'm going to pass it back over to Michael, who's going to wrap it up.
Awesome. Thanks, Regina. You did a great job moderating. We really appreciate your engagement on this and excited that we have a couple more years with you on campus. So, and look forward to meeting you in person at some point as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. As Regina said, we really appreciate your questions and your engagement. It was great to see some new faces from folks who probably aren't here. Kent, you're drawing out all sorts of new folks from parts of campus to the event today, so we really love that. And I did put a link. We do have events coming up, including one later this afternoon at 4 o'clock. So for anybody who's on or watching on LinkedIn, please join us again. And Kent, thank you for joining today. It was a great session. I just texted your wife and I was like, Kent is killing it in our speaker series today. So it's great to have you engage with our Case Western Reserve community. I do, because you are so close down in Columbus. Once things get back to functioning here, we'd love to have you up on campus and in Cleveland. I know there's a number of people on the call today that probably would love to meet you in person. So we'll look forward to welcoming you and your family up to Cleveland at some point soon. But thank you again for taking the time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. And I can't wait till we're all in person. I'd love to come up. It's so close. So
Great. Well, great. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
bye-bye.